Hello, everyone. This is Matt Bechtel with the Book Brilliant podcast. I really appreciate everybody joining me today. We're doing a couple episodes here on an issue that I think is very important. And we're talking about September 11th, 2001. It's been 20 years since the horrible attacks that day. And I wanted to use this platform to interview people that had perspectives who were maybe there directly or were directly impacted. I'd actually told Brendan about this idea when I had interviewed him for our episode number 3. And Brendan was really intrigued by the idea. He lives in New York City, grew up right outside it, and he loves the city. And he had offered to come on. And hey, of course I was going to accept that. And so in this episode, I got everything I could have wanted out of it. I was really surprised at how much Brendan knew about the Twin Towers. Not only did we get to talk about the Twin Towers, but we got to talk about New York and New York City's culture in general. And that was really interesting to me. I've lived in Nebraska my whole life. I dearly love my state, and I joke about it a few times, throughout the podcast and stuff, and make some comparisons. But I really love Nebraska, and I love living here. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. To the point where, frankly, I haven't really been as interested in other places until really recently. And so, learning about New York was just really intriguing to me. I've never been there. It's always kind of just been something I couldn't really fathom. And so, listening to Brendan explain some things and invite me down there, it was great. He sings a song as well that he wrote about the towers in this interview. That song is called Hometown. And it's kind of mind-blowing that I'm in this position where, this guy who I kind of grew up listening to his music is playing a song for me directly for this podcast. So again, Brendan, thank you for coming on. And thank you for everybody who has supported this podcast as well. And another thing that Brendan did that was extremely nice about this was he did this right before leaving for the Summerland tour. That's pretty gracious of him because he had to go for the tour just a few days after we had recorded this. So check out that tour, the Summerland Tour 2021. It's got Everclear, it's got Wheatus, Hoobastank, and it's got Living Color. So it's quite the lineup there. And please follow Brendan on all social media at Wheatus, Facebook.com/Wheatus, Twitter at Wheatus, Instagram at Wheatus as well. So let's get started. Thank you for checking it out. All right. Well, Brendan B. Brown, thank you for joining us again. We had a great talk last time, and you have a deep love for New York City. And in September, I kind of wanted to honor and remember the victims and the heroes from September 11, 2001. And, you've got a song that you've dedicated to that, and you had some stories as well. So I asked you to come back on, and you very graciously said yes, even though you're getting ready for a huge Summerland tour. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, man. I'm in the midst of getting this work done right here behind me. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, it's all happening.
That's awesome. You're a busy guy. Well, I wanted to ask, starting off, you are from, I always get them mixed up, but you're from Long Island, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
I always start to say Staten Island because of that movie.
But not that far off, but yeah.
So, you went to high school in New York City, correct? You had to take.
No, I went to high school very close to New York City, okay. Which was a train commute, a daily train commute away from my home, my childhood home. Yeah. It was kind of like you made the most part of the trip toward the city to get there. So it was like right on the border of Queens and Nassau. Okay,
awesome. And I know that I've heard you say before in other interviews that, you've always liked going into New York City as a kid and you really had a heart for it. Did you ever visit the Twin Towers as a kid?
Yes. We had a wedding reception with my family, Windows of the World. When I was about, I was really young. I might've been 5 or 6 years old when that happened. They were kind of built when I was built. They're as old as me, 1973. I know quite a bit of the history of the engineering of the buildings. The Port Authority engineer, Guy Tazzoli, was mainly responsible for making them happen. They were an unlikely offspring of this strange thing called the Port Authority, which is this bi-state agency, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And only a bi-state agency that could break a lot of each state's rules to get it done would be able to do something that grand.
Yeah.
I'm sure in your research you found out that they created 16 acres of Manhattan real estate in order to build them by digging out the bedrock.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. Just that they even existed was sort of unlikely and strange and cool. I was from a distance growing up driving on the BQE there, which is the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. There's a stretch where it goes past Dumbo and the Brooklyn Bridge, where you just couldn't take your eyes off them. They were so fascinating. They were these giant sort of Stanley Kubrick style monolith, buildings, and they were gleaming in the sun with these sort of tiny little elven windows. A lot of people criticized the architecture at the time that they were made, but I really liked it. I thought it was sort of like futuristic looking.
Yeah. The opposition to the towers is definitely interesting to read about. The people that thought planes were going to be flying into them because of what happened with the Empire State Building in World War II. They thought that was going to happen on accident. And then they thought it was just, I guess, too invasive because they were so huge, like you had said. Have you ever read about have you ever heard that basically how they engineered it and kind of like with what you said about some of the ways that they were able to do it is ultimately what weakened the structure for them to fall? Have you ever read anything on that?
Yeah, I have a bit. Essentially, in layman's engineering terms, they were like a waste paper basket turned upside down, where the foundational structure or the superstructure was on the exterior.
Yeah.
Which, of course, when a plane hits the exterior, then it's piling into the superstructure building.
That's actually a brilliant way to put that. I never thought of it like that, but that makes complete sense.
Yeah. And it was more complicated than that. They shared the whole entire World Trade Center complex was, I think, 7 buildings. And they shared a basement. They called it the bathtub, which was the entirety of the superstructure underneath the World Trade Center, which is one of the reasons that they couldn't put the fire out, because that fire, when the buildings came down, a lot like a syringe, they pumped all the jet fuel and burning whatever down into the superstructure basement, where it stayed. And there was also I can't confirm this, but recently somebody told me, geez, I think it was Will Calhoun from Living Color we were talking about it on my back porch, that the foundation was made with a sealant that they had to get from England to keep the groundwater at bay. So, but that sealant expands outward as it encounters moisture. So the differential between the hot fire inside and the expanding materials on the outside pushing toward the waterline created a situation where the fire was impossible to put out. He was just describing this to me. I'm sure I'm not quite getting it right, but it was fascinating. Conceptually, he made it make sense, having been told so, I think, himself by an engineer. So it was like, there was all sorts of things that were wonderful about it that were ultimately perfectly used against it,
Yeah, that's a good, you summed it up honestly really well, because I try to explain that to people, and I think that you just put it in really simple terms. Do you remember when you were there as a kid, do you remember being there, and like, do you remember if like the building swayed a lot, whatever floor you were on, or any memories like that?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of a great feeling. That kid I knew in high school, his father worked there. I think it was the 74th floor, Dean Witter.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in there and visited him for lunch during the summer. And it took forever to get up that elevator, but they were really fast.
Really?
And then,
would your ears pop in them?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And also just the sort of the inertia of going up in the air so fast, so quick, the express elevators. And a lot of the offices had windows, access to the windows that were floor to ceiling. They criticized the window design, but it was actually I always thought that was kind of bullshit, because they were wonderful. They were like, you could jump up on the radiator and stand on the radiator and put your head against the glass and look straight down to the street. Jeez. Like from the very tippy top. Those windows were incredible. They were narrow, but it was just about wide enough where a human being could fit in the middle,
Yeah.
And I remember just doing that for hours and having to get chased out of the office up there.
Really?
Just like, yeah, just like staring, like looking at see people so small. It's like being in a plane. Really,
yeah. Was it like the Sears Tower, I think, in Chicago? Like the Sears Tower has a spot where you can basically, it's like a gift shop. The whole floor is like a visitor's
glass. Section. Yeah, there's a glass floor there. Yeah.
I've been up to that.
This wasn't quite like that, because so when you're against the glass like that, and it's like there's a steel beam or on either side of you, you're in the space of the building that sways. You're between two swaying sort of like fixed points. Of course, when you're inside and on the floor, there was all of this sort of like all this stuff that kind of made it dissipate. The floor was wood, and the sheetrock on the walls, and all of these other elements that sort of disconnected you from the fact that the building was swaying. But when you were up against the window, you couldn't help but to see. You could see the building just kind of doing this like gentle oscillation. It was really cool.
Have you ever been to Sears Tower?
No, I have not.
Okay, because I'm wondering. So the way that they built it, did it actually minimize like the swaying? Because when I was in Chicago at the Sears Tower, I don't even know if it's called the Sears Tower now, but when I was up there, like you could 100% feel it, and it made me like feel really weird, because being from a town of like 27,000 people, and then all of a sudden being in Chicago where the streets are dark by how tall the buildings are, was freaky to me by itself. But have you been in any other like big buildings like that? And what's that like?
I've been in the Empire State Building a bunch. Okay. I love the observation deck up there.
Does it sway up there?
Not quite. Really? Empire State is like a steel fortress. Okay. It's very, very stable.
Yeah.
I don't think that thing's built like they used to build things, really. But when they got to the engineering efficiencies of the 70s and 80s, it's when they employed what they did on the World Trade Center. It's like built to flow with its environment, whereas prior to that, it was man versus nature, if you will. Like it was this like challenge to defeat the wind, and the Trade Center didn't defeat the wind. The Trade Center worked with the wind, So,
wow.
it's very cool. The Sears Tower is a beautiful thing. I love all of its sort of awkward setbacks and there's different parts of it. It looks like it's still trying to make a decision. That building.
No kidding. It is. It is kind of strange in that capacity. But so did they have anything like at the Twin Towers for like the public to go in or whether it's pay a ticket and go see or anything for the public, or was it basically all just like law firms and banks?
Oh, I think there was an observation deck, and of course windows on the world, but I never went into the observation deck because I always knew somebody who worked in it. If I was there to visit a relative or somebody's father or something like that. It was, it's just a place you got the chance to go in and out of because so many people from Long Island commuted into the city to work, and a lot of them worked in the towers,
Yeah.
When they came down, my parents wound up going to like 40 some odd wakes and funerals. It's just because of the sheer number of people from our area who worked in those towers,
Well, could you see the Twin Towers on your train ride to school every day, or is that not anywhere near?
There are one or two spots on Long Island where you can catch the arc of the city in the distance, but I couldn't on my particular train ride. I couldn't see that. No.
Yeah. And so when you were at the Twin Towers like shortly before they fell, correct?
Yeah, I had I lived in the 90s. In the second part of the 90s, I lived on Avenue B and 14th Street, which is not the same neighborhood, but it's, a bike ride away. And I used to just like to go ride through the courtyard and look at the sculpture and just like kind of stare up at them. And it was a meditative place for me. Yeah. And I thought that I was like weirdly proud of them, not because of America or, our like experiment, but more as a New Yorker, as like, isn't that interesting that they figured out how to do that? Look at this city, look at what's happening here. There's people solving all kinds of strange problems here. And it was like a kind of like, well, if somebody can do that, it was like the architectural moonshot, you know what I mean? Like of my own generation. Like it was something really impressive to look at. Yeah.
It's bizarre to me when I think about how they were really only up for 30 or 40 years. I mean, they weren't up that long.
No.
And it's that's kind of it's very sad, but it kind of blows my mind that it was up for such a short period of time. Where were you at on September 11th, 2001?
September 11th, 2001, I was in Sony Studios in London.
Oh, wow.
And I was with a wonderful mixing engineer called Dave Bascom, who, if you look up his discography, you'll see all the wonderful stuff he's done. Depeche Mode and a whole bunch of other stuff. But he was busy mixing our third single, which had been a really fraught process for us. It was recorded at Abbey Road, which was really good, but there was a lot of tension with the label about the video and how it was going to all shake out. And I was I was on the phone calling the cab company after our final listen, and they were printing mixes. We were done. And I was calling a black cab to take me to Heathrow because I had a ticket to fly back to New York on September 11th.
Mm-hmm.
That was when I was supposed to land that night.
Wow.
And while I'm on the phone, because they were finished with the mix, they turned on the TV just to watch like a game show or something. And all the coverage was being preempted by just a picture of the towers. And when they turned it on, I happened to be just gazing up around the television area. And it was a really tight close-up of the sort of elven arched window tops that they had and the smoke pouring out. And in that single frame of television coverage, I knew exactly what that was. I knew that was the Twin Towers. I knew that they were on fire. I knew it was a terrorist attack. And as soon as they zoomed out and showed the hole, I knew that they were going to come down, or that the one was going to come down. And then the second one hit. The second plane hit. And that was when it was like clear in an instant that it was an attack. And we were just kind of in shock, having worked on this song and being finished with it, to have this sudden, like, like herald of global upheaval, like on the television. It was really weird. It felt like Germany had invaded or something. It was just like epic shift.
Yeah. Do you remember, did you cry? Were you quiet? Did you yell? I mean, how did you react?
I said several times, I said it before they even knew what I was talking about. I was like, that's the Twin Towers. That's the Twin Towers. That's a terrorist attack. Oh my God. Oh my God. And I remember I was standing up and I hung up on the cabbie and I was like, just watching the television. And I was like, that's a terrorist attack. And I went, oh, Jesus, I said, George Bush is going to launch a fucking nuclear weapon. I just kind of caved in on that. Like, this is going to be bad. Like and then it was like, after that, it was like, guess what? You're not going home for like, 20 days. You're stuck.
Is that how long you were stuck there?
Yeah, I was stuck there for a really long time. I think it was 18 days total. But it was supposed to be 20. And then it was like, oh, your flight got moved up. And the other thing that happened is not really that consequential, but it affected us profoundly at the time. We had tour dates that were supposed to start in mid-October.
Yeah.
that were supposed to go all the way through to Christmas, and the whole thing got sort of truncated and pushed back to mid-November through mid-December. So we lost half the tour from it. If for no other reason, we weren't going to be able to ship our gear anymore. Flying gear across the Atlantic had become like instantly problematic, and just everything changed, and we were suddenly retooling the whole entire like course of our lives. At the same time that we were finding out who was and who wasn't in the building, because we knew people who were in it. So, it's like
when you did get back to New York, what were you, was it like, just trying to live life as normal, or were you doing any, I don't know if it was, whether it's volunteer stuff or meeting with friends or family who were impacted? I mean, what did you do your first day back in New York? Do you remember?
Well, I had to really scramble, because at the time, we were still a little band, even though we were starting to have some pretty serious things happen. Yeah. I had all this work to do to figure out how to fix this tour that had been kind of sliced in half. So it was like instantly just on the phone, stuck on the phone, doing a lot of touring stuff. And then other phone calls where it was like, hey, was Jeff's dad in the building? Like, because anybody and everybody who worked there, who you knew from, 2 years ago, you were looking, you were trying to find their number and find out what happened. Yeah. But the phone lines in America were all kind of screwed up for, you don't know if you remember that, but like, I remember I was a person who had a cell phone, a Nextel cell phone back then. Yeah. Because of the job that I had fixing computers prior to being signed to Columbia. And I kept that cell phone, and I remember I couldn't call anybody. It was like the lines were jammed up for a few weeks, and it was just a hassle. So in terms of volunteering, they were telling, at that point, by the time I got back 20 days later, they were telling people not to show up to volunteer anymore, because there was nothing that sadly, anybody who got out actually did get out. Anybody who was stuck inside when they came down, those people died. Yeah. And it wasn't a rescue effort. It was a recovery effort. Some people were saved, but the majority of people who were stuck in the buildings died. And they were figuring that was something that they were kind of figuring out 25 days after it happened. So as far as people, I know my cousin Phil was a FDNY, and he was on I think the second shift. Luckily, he got sent in. My friend Artie was NYPD, and he was stationed at the Brooklyn Bridge, making sure foot traffic was getting over the bridge, and no car traffic was coming. So it was like a very tactile experience for people I knew.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, because people were like running through the Brooklyn Bridge, correct? I mean, people ran across that. I did an interview with a guy who's a police officer named Vic Ferrari. He's written a few books, and he talked about how he said he remembers all of the women's shoes that were like just down the street, was just like all these women's shoes left behind, because the women were kicking off their high heels and just, sprinting barefoot. Yeah, away from it. Your friend's dad, who I think you said he worked on the 72nd or so floor, did he live? Was he working that day? Did he survive?
Fortunately, he had retired a year before, so he wasn't there. And the same was true of another kid I knew in high school. His father wasn't there anymore because he had retired. So it was just like by luck of the draw, kind of, that they weren't. Otherwise, they would have certainly been there. The worst personalized account was from a friend of my brother's growing up, family we've known since my parents were in high school, who was there when they were attacked and got out. And his account of sort of running across the courtyard while bodies were landing nearby is like beyond harrowing. That hearing him hearing him incapable of relaying that experience was pretty stunning.
Yeah, I can't. That's one thing. when I study September 11th, and you read about it, and I just fall in love with the towers. I fall in love with the people, the New Yorkers and stuff. And then it's tragic because what's going to happen. And it's like, you just want, anytime I read a book about it, it's like, you just hope that at the end of the book, it's going to be, history will be rewritten and everything's going to be okay. And when I think about the people who had, whether they jumped, or I believe some of the people who fell were just thought that maybe they could, somehow, parkour it to another window or another floor, and then they slipped and fell or whatever. I mean, that to me, when I put myself in the shoes of somebody who's trying to decide, do I want to burn to death or jump off of a tower? It's like, that's pretty mind blowing. It breaks my heart.
It's awful. And you know what? The other part that really sucks, if it was the goal to attack something powerful, it was a miss, because the powerful people don't show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's the cleaning crew that shows up at 8 o'clock. It's the people who open the offices, the people who do the hard, low paid work to make those buildings run. That's who was there. They didn't get anybody important, quote unquote, in the global scheme of like world trade or any of that stuff.
Yeah,
they got the working class. They got working class people who had, probably were struggling in their own lives to feed their families, and were showing up on time because they needed to. That's who they attacked, which is just pretty obnoxious. It's just an obnoxious thing. Like, it's not the Dick Cheneys of this world wouldn't be in that building at that hour, is my point.
You brought up a good point I had never thought about, which is, if the terrorists were trying to get, the owners of the banks or the owners of the law firm, the people that were there were the secretaries and the workers, the custodians. It wasn't the powerful people. I've never thought about that before.
Yeah. They attacked the poorest of the employees of the World Trade Center, not the real beneficiaries.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. There's so much that could be said about it. I just, as a New Yorker, I had this sort of real anger about, those buildings not being there anymore. Like, like this murderous vandalism kind of thing,
Do you think they should have rebuilt them? Because like I said, I'm from Nebraska, man. I've never even been to New York City, but I always thought they should have rebuilt them bigger and stronger. And I think that was on the table. What do you, are you happy with what's there now, or do you wish?
Not really. One World Trade is in my opinion, is an architectural compromise. It just kind of looks like a tall, shiny building that you'd see in like the future of like Houston, Texas. It doesn't look like New York City. It doesn't look like an innovation. It doesn't look like a breakthrough. And in that respect, I think it's like kind of really just kind of sad that George Pataki was the governor of the state at that time. And, I think he pushed Libeskind into place, the architect. And I don't think that they did the best that they could have. I think the original combination of this sort of like borough-born, Guy Tizzoli might be from New Jersey originally. I'm not sure. I think he might have been from Brooklyn. I can't remember, but he's the original guy who made them happen. And it would have been far better, in my opinion, to build back better, like you said. If for no other reason than it's just like, why would New York City ever give up its iconic front teeth? Why would we do that? I just don't understand why they felt the need to build something different. It just made me angry.
It's a silly comparison, but I think that the Twin Towers represented New York City well. I mean, when I think of New York City and never have been there, it's only from movies or TV, and it's like, bold and brash and powerful and And that's what the Twin Towers were. And the silly comparison is it's like with the Nebraska Cornhuskers, I don't know if you know anything about college football, but my favorite coach was always Bo Pelini. And, people didn't like Bo Pelini because he was always going crazy and cussing and freaking out. And I was like, but that's the embodiment of Nebraska football, man. It's like, go to a party, you will see people lose their minds over the football game. So I was like, Bo Pelini is my favorite coach. I don't care about any of the other stuff. I thought he represented us perfectly as far as how people really feel about the game.
You're not tuning in to watch like a cold-blooded tactician. You want to see somebody who's red hot.
Oh, I get mad and I'm not the biggest sports guy in the world, believe me, but I get mad if with Riley, Coach Riley, and I like Scott Frost a lot, but even him, when he's too calm when things aren't going well, it makes me even more mad because it's like, I want to see you, get fired up, then I at least know that it's being handled, I feel like. So that's my silly comparison, because I know that some people thought, again, some people were against the Twin Towers. They thought they were too invasive, while other people thought like, hell no, this represents New York City.
Well, and also, going back to the history of the location, Alexander Hamilton is a guy who, was a person of color who came to New York and made himself new, and got to the top at the first chance there was to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, we have tons of problems. We have tons of places where we fall short on our creeds, but I've always felt like New York City is this place where you need to live up to the creed to survive, because there's lots of different people and lots of different languages, and we're stacked on top of each other like rats, right?
Yeah.
But in that chaos and in that all of that disparate energy, we have to find a way to get along, because if you don't find a way to get along, the city fails, and you can't have the city fail. That's not an option.
Yeah.
So by and by, the successful rise of New York City over the centuries has depended on abandoning your racism, abandoning your theocratic notions of the old world, abandoning your prejudices about the opposite sex, abandoning your hangups about sexuality and whatever else, and just fucking get in there and get on with it, man. Don't be such a wimp. Get in there and drop your bullshit and get to work. And I feel like that's New York City to me. That's the highest, sort of aspirational, perhaps naive, but aspirational, inspirational standard for New York City. And those towers represented that to me, at least aesthetically. So,
that again is something I've never really thought of, especially being from a smaller town. If anybody's different in any regard, doesn't even have to be something as major as race or sexuality or anything like that. There's a chance that, people they don't have to, if they're not used to working with you, they may find a way around it or this and that. But what you're saying is kind of very intriguing to me, of kind of answer some questions I've always had about the way people from big cities, just some of them have that calmness and they can just react to any scenario and they're cool with whatever. And it kind of makes sense when you put it like that, because you have to be that way in a big city. You can't be picky.
No.
With who you're around, who you work with.
Yeah. You can't be picky and fragile about all your preferences. You got to get in there with the mess and find your way in the mess. And by and by, as you do that, you will realize that the only way for it to work is to work with each other, cooperation.
Yeah.
And not getting hung up on the details of like where somebody came from or what they believe. Doesn't matter. None of it matters,
Yeah. I'm kind of a guy that likes, a vacation to me is Yellowstone National Park and maybe a beach. I went to Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and that kind of gets my stress level up. And, when I was in Chicago as a teenager, I just remember it really just blowing my mind and that big city mentality of just like like everything about Chicago and let me rephrase that. Everything about a big city scared me in ways that I didn't know that I was, going to be afraid of. For a while, like after being in Chicago, I'm like, I don't want to go to LA, New York. I'm good. I don't need to do it. And over the past couple of years, I've really changed on that. And I want to experience all those things, but obviously now there's major limitations with the COVID and everything going on. But people from big cities have just always been fascinating to me because, again, it just felt like they had a totally different mentality that I wanted to have, really, So what I want to talk about New York culture a little bit too, and I wanted to go back into baseball because I'm showing my, like I said, I'm not a sports nut or anything, but what's from a New Yorker's perspective, man? What's the difference between the New York Mets and the New York Yankees?
Mostly winning and always losing. I have friends who are Mets fans, so I can't go too far. They're a special breed, man. They're like, they hang in there for the abuse.
Yeah.
Like they're tough. Yankee fans, the Bronx. I live in the Bronx. I've been a Yankee fan since my brother discovered Don Mattingly in the 80s, so there've been, I can't be phony and say that I'm a full on sports fanatic or anything. Baseball is very, just peaceful to me to watch. And I love that there's anything that can happen. I love that it mixes it up with the defense having the ball at the start of play and all of these weird American kind of like twists of what rounders used to be, turning a kid's game into something sort of miraculous is totally fascinating to me. So I'm a Yankee fan, but the Mets, I would say, as a New Yorker, you have this soft spot for them over there in Queens where they just lose all the time, and it's like, you got to feel for them. They're like the Boston Red Sox of New York, they're kind of like that. Like, but when I was a kid, the Mets were like huge, like Darryl Strawberry and, they were such a big deal. They had something about the marketing when we were kids was a little bit sharper than the Yankees for a while. They had the edge, on the marketing. I think Mets uniforms were kind of cooler in some kind of way, even though the pinstripes are awesome. But it's like, it's just one of those things where it's like, what side you're on, but you can look over the fence here and there and go, okay, they beat the Braves. That's fucking great. Like I get if anybody beats the Diamondbacks or the Braves, no matter what, if they're from the East Coast, like the Phillies or something like that, if I see that happen, I'm kind of like, yeah.
That's funny, man. Yeah. I know that like in Chicago, it's like that you got Wrigley Field, and then the White Sox is I think more South Side. So when I would meet people from Chicago, I'd be like, "Oh, you a Cubs fan?" They're like, "No, I'm from the South Side," and I used to not know what that means. I understand it now, but I didn't know what the division was in New York with the Yankees and the Mets. What side of town made you a fan of what? And then is there like
it's borough specific here. So like the Bronx is the northernmost borough. That's where the Yankees play. Yankee Stadium is in the Bronx. Yeah, but Queens is where the Mets are from, and they play in Queens. and it's like, it's a real thing like that. Those two spots. Now there in the other boroughs of people from all over the city, you'll find it's kind of like Mets, Jets, Yankees, Giants. Like there's a bit of a tribe split there. But you don't know what you're going to get in Staten Island or Manhattan or Long Island. You're just as likely to bump into a Yankee fan as you are a Mets fan. Okay. And if you bump into a Mets fan and you're a Yankees fan, you're like, oh boy, here we go. They just have so much to say about stuff,
That's so Manhattan and those other areas, it's kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, very much so.
That's funny. That's how it is here. Like, there's a lot of Kansas City fans, and then there's like a bunch of Bears fans. That's what I am. Vikings fans, and then just random. A lot of Patriot fans. If a kid, I'll notice that with like teenagers now, when they were really little, the Patriots were always winning and stuff. So they've grown up to be these Patriot fans or whatever. So no, that's interesting. So yeah, the Giants and the Jets. Do you follow Gary Vaynerchuk at all?
No.
I know his big aspiration is to buy the Jets someday, and so he's kind of a glutton for punishment every year.
Yeah.
On. So
I don't follow American football in any way.
Yeah,
I NFL is totally weird to me and alien. I don't enjoy watching it.
Why is that, do you think?
I'm not sure. The talent is always impressive, To see a guy who's like at the peak of his physical condition flying through the air, 7 feet off the ground, jumping over 4 guys with a ball in his hand, he's going to clear 20 feet by the end of it. Pretty impressive, it's like you can't knock that. Yeah. But just the game itself, the rules and the physics of the game, the oppositional setup doesn't really do much for me.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of force and not a lot of discipline.
Did when you broke your arm as a kid, were you guys playing football?
No, that was soccer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was any deep-seated childhood wounds, from playing football as a kid.
No, not at all. Yeah, that was they recruited me onto their team to play goalie in a soccer game, and those guys were so used to beating the shit out of me that they just didn't even flinch at the end. I had already saved the ball. The play was over.
Yeah,
it was in my hand, and I was just about to get up and pick it up. And a kid ran up and kicked it afterwards.
Yeah, that's such a horrible story. But I didn't know if there was anything as a kid, if there was any kind of football types or anything that.
No, not really. To be honest, I don't remember anybody doing anything football wise when I was a kid. There was a lot of soccer and Little League, but not a lot of football stuff.
What about the basketball teams in New York? Like Jay-Z had that team that he started up. How does that all shake up in the city?
Basketball is wonderful. Basketball is jazz,
Yeah.
Like that's a continuous up-tempo improv of skill and cooperation.
Yeah.
And the only time it ever gets boring is when there's a ball hog who doesn't bring it. You know what I mean? You can't get bored otherwise with basketball, though. In my opinion, you can watch it, and it's like, oh right, this is so cool. Like it feels like a tempo, feels like a beat is happening. Yeah, that's why one of our keyboard players, Michael Bellar, he kind of turned me on to how much it is jazz. It's a metaphor. It's a physical personification of jazz. Each team is improvising this kind of subtle, a subtle update on the form every time they go back and forth.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Absolutely. What do you think? What do you think people maybe don't understand or would be surprised to know about New York City, but also 9/11 in New York City? And I'm talking, what is something that people either don't understand about September 11th now, maybe even like kids my age, because like I remember that day pretty clearly, but a lot of people my age don't, and the people younger than me definitely don't. And so I think it kind of people kind of minimize it. So is there anything that you've got millennials in your band? Are there ever things about the Twin Towers that you tell them that blows their mind or anything? Or
for me, the kind of interesting stuff that I wind up talking about with anybody from any age group is the history of the actual physical location.
Yeah.
The fact that that's the ground zero of the Dutch East India Company's colonial foothold in the New World, right?
Yeah.
The fact that it was that down there, the Battery was originally this sort of like, the Dutch East India Company was just like really just a bunch of pirates who were sanctioned by the Dutch stock market, right?
Yeah.
And they were out there pilfering and stealing and getting beaver skins and whatever else. But by and by, New York, from the very inception, and in particular on that particular piece of tiny little land, that's the other thing that's pretty interesting about it. The reason people were able to walk from the catastrophe across to Brooklyn is because it's like 4 blocks. Yeah. Like the tip of Manhattan is tiny down there. And for this gigantic focal point of the world, this terrorist target, to try, the fulcrum of world trade and all that stuff, to be located in this tiny little spot that was 400 years ago, the place where the Dutch set up this sort of like throwaway outpost that they had to do it. They had to have this outpost because all the other imperial forces were spreading across the globe. So the Dutch planted their little flag at the very tip of Manhattan where that happened. It was New Amsterdam. And it's still tiny down there. It's still this tiny little place with cobblestone streets. Yeah. And from its inception, there were Huguenots and Jews and people of color and lots of different languages. And it was what originally was like this kind of throwaway place gained strength and took over because of that thing I was talking about before, that they realized they had to work together. They had to find a way to work together to survive, to make it work. And that little piece of real estate down there is still a place where if I'm down there, I feel like that's the thing that you have to be doing. That's the thing you have to be aware of. Leave your prejudices and your ideas about other people. Just leave them at the door. And when you go in there with like, nothing's going to bother you. You're just going to get the work done. You're not going to get hung up. No more hang-ups, which is why people come here to start a new life. So in that regard, it was an attack on like the best of modernity. If eventually we all look past all of our heritage and our history and our, all of the sins of our fathers and all the mistakes and the failures to live up to our creeds, and we start living up to them by embodying that, like that forget what your religion is, forget where you came from, for all that shit. That tiny little spot is still that piece of Dutch real estate where they had to do that, And every time they got into, a fight with the Indians, it was worse for the colony. It turned out to be a bad thing. Yeah. So, like it's, I'm not trying to downplay the genocide of Native Americans in any sense. It was sort of the grandest, worstest thing of that period. And slavery as well New York was a place where there was a slave trade. But I don't think people understand in terms of the history of the place, like what actually went on there in that moment of its inception that is so similar still to the day that the towers actually fell. Wow. It's still a tiny little piece of land where lots of people from different places are coming to make ends meet. Yeah. And they're leaving their bullshit behind. The best of them,
Yeah. That's really good. I've never thought about it like that, but it actually puts some stuff in perspective. While you were talking, I grabbed this book. It's called, I think it's just called The World Trade Center, a Tribute. I had rented it out from my library, but it kind of puts some stuff into perspective because I was reading about like they have a whole thing about the heritage of it, and as you were talking, it was kind of connecting the dots in my head because I was like, because I'm reading the stuff about like what is it, St. Paul's Chapel and kind of the history about that land, and I think that the way that you've explained it kind of makes a little bit more sense to me, and crosses that bridge of how it was when they founded it and constructed it, and the similarities between then and now. It's actually really interesting to think about, and I don't know if this book's online. I imagine anybody could get it, but I'll put it in the show notes. Once again, A World Trade Center, a tribute by Bill Harris. but it's got pictures of kind of everything you were talking about, and does a pretty good job of the history of it, and what it meant to New York. So that was an interesting insight you had there.
Yeah, the Ken Burns documentary on New York is another one that goes into that pretty in depth.
The Ken Burns documentary?
Yeah.
I'll have to see if I just watched that documentary, The Man in the Red Bandana. Have you ever seen that?
No, I have not. No.
Are you familiar with that story of Wells Crowther?
No, I'm not.
He was a dude who worked. I don't know exactly where he worked at, but basically they were all on fire. Like the where he was at was on fire, and he found an exit. And then he could have just left, but instead he kept coming back up over and over again to get more and more people down. And then he was taking firefighters up with him, and he had a red bandana on. So these people are talking about being like, they're surrounded by flames. They're like, oh, I'm about to die. And then all of a sudden this dude just pops through with the fire extinguisher and a red bandana on. And he's like, come with me. And he led like, I don't even know, 17, something like either 9 or maybe it was 17 people out. I feel awful for not knowing exactly, but he saved a bunch of people's lives. They say at least 10 people. So I guess maybe they don't know exactly, but there's a great documentary kind of about how much of a giving person he was, and how ultimately he died when the towers came down. He was leading a group of firefighters back up to show them like, hey, I know where there's more people who need your help.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good documentary. But I'm going to look up that Ken Burn one right now. So What do you think about, New York City post 9/11? What's a big misconception about the city that, I don't know, maybe you come across as you meet people and maybe in the Midwest, like where I'm at, or what's something about New York that makes you proud, and that maybe something that people don't realize about it?
Well, the national discourse is so overly politicized now. And we're at a time in our history where the tension between inner cities, urban environments, and rural environments is kind of at an all-time high. People who don't live in New York City and who've never lived here, never even visited, I've seen them online saying things that they're just talking out their ass. You know what I mean? Like really just like, stuff you shouldn't say about something you don't understand and you don't know. And I always thought that this place can be a place where you really learn something new about the way people can live together. About what's possible on that. So I think the big revelation for somebody who's never been here, in particular, somebody who might have some negative preconceived notions of cities in general, I dare you to come here and figure it out with us. I think you might even surprise yourself.
Yeah.
You get, I remember coming into the city in the 80s when I was a kid. It was a much more dangerous place, but I remember just feeling this energy of like possibility, and everybody's minding their own business, but they're all cooperating at the same time. Can you imagine a place where everybody minds their own business, but simultaneously cooperates?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
Sounds like heaven to me.
It is. It's like in Omaha. Like I've been spending a lot more time in Omaha, and so and that's been really interesting. And Omaha is not big enough for that, so it's like you'll be around people, but a lot of the times, like they're not minding their own business, right? So I like that thought of like, because when I see the pictures and the videos of people, just everybody's walking to work, everybody's looking ahead, minding their own business. I'm sure if somebody needed help, they would help. But that's definitely that's kind of always blown my mind about New York City. That's when I think of New York, that's one of the things I think about are all the people like walking to work.
Yeah. I was listening to, I forget how it happened. I think it was an NPR article. And it was like a sort of a day in the life kind of thing, but it was a day in the life of a tragedy, right? Or an almost tragedy. And what they were doing was they were following paramedics in New York City. Just on a regular old day, a French tourist has a heart attack. And they're on the scene. NPR is on the scene on a ride along with the paramedic crew in the ambulance. So they're there when the call comes in. They're there when they arrive. And this is basically the city in its best state is a machine for solving problems, right? It's very mechanized. There's a grid. There's tall buildings and concrete and metal are everywhere. And there's vehicles flying by and people are bike messengers and everybody is in the process of solving some problem, big problems, small problems, life-threatening problems, you know? And I was fascinated by that little piece that I heard on NPR of like how they saved this guy's life and it turned out okay. He didn't know it, but he was walking around with the Widowmaker. Heart failure was happening to him.
Oh yeah.
And he was there with his getting his daughter started off at school in late August, and you know, like they were just like doing something. They were solving their problem, and then they had a problem, and somebody else had to come in and solve that problem. Yeah. And at its best, the city is a place where, at the drop of a hat, there's somebody there to solve the problem. We gotta keep solving these problems. This is what happens when people come together. So do their problems come together, their issues, you know, so their emergencies or whatnot. So if I was to have any kind of a health issue, I'd want to be standing right in Times Square. You know, that's the place where you want to be, you know?
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to think about too. I love it. Yeah, just a lot of people trying to help each other solve problems, basically, right?
That's all it is. That's what the city is, you know. That's all it has time for. Yeah, like that's all you got time to do, you know.
I love it. Well, I was going to wrap this up with, you know, could you talk a little bit about the song that you wrote, in tribute, and could you play that too?
Sure, of course I can. So, I have here the guitar that I recorded Teenage Dirtbag on, which is 1890s Bay State parlor guitar.
Nice.
So it's over 100 years old now.
You don't take that on tour with you, do you?
Oh no.
I feel really blessed right now to be on a chat with you and see that thing, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a little ornery when it comes to the tuning and whatnot. So I'm gonna tune it up before I play it for you. But
yeah, thank you for pulling that out. That's amazing. I had a lady who let me play her handmade $8,000 guitar a couple months ago. I was visiting with her, and she's like, "Do you want to play this?" And I'm thinking, "Well, yeah, but why are you letting me play this?" You know? It's like if I had that, I wouldn't let anybody touch it. But
true. Yeah. So I'm going to put this microphone that's around my head here in a position that I've had luck with in the past.
Cool.
If it doesn't sound good or something's wrong with it, just wave your hand at me or like give me the hook.
Sounds good.
All right, hang on. Okay, here we go. I trade all my sunshine for twin towers to hide behind and find you there. When I left on that Sunday to come home on a Tuesday, well, I never thought I'd have to stay and watch the world explode. And I swear it was beautiful before they sent
those aeroplanes. And I thought I could show it to you just like my dad did. Hometown come tumbling down. When she came on a Friday, well, I took her home a long way so she could see. She asked how they made it and would they ever change it. And I said, no way. But it's half of what you see, none of what you hear, believe. And I told her that they remind me of Motown 60s skinny tie. What they thought the future looked like, where the Jetsons live. Hometown come tumbling down. Well, we watched it and we cried. And we ran to the front line. And some came home. But I stay off the expressway. Nothing to see there anyway. That view sucks now. But there was a time the broken traffic couldn't get me down. And I swear it was beautiful. We hope they build them tall again. Until then, your imagination is all that you will have. East and west side, all around the town. Tots and river roadie, London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and baby alright. Trip life fantastic on the sidewalks of New York. Oh.
Good job, man.
Okay.
That was great.
Sound
That
all right?
was great. That was good. Good job.
Thanks. As a song called "Hometown" from our third album, is just a sort of simple tribute to the local scenery of it all. You know?
Yeah.
I can't speak for what the World Trade Center means to the world. I can only speak about what it meant to me as a kid and what it meant to me as a young adult. And to try and trace its history back in a positive way, for reconciliation, you know,
Yeah.
of religions and classes and races and preferences and sexualities and identities and whatever else comes together here to live in disparate harmony. So I put that old New York folk song, "The Sidewalks of New York," at the end of it, which is old enough to be a public domain work now. But Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. While you were playing it, I was thinking of a couple things. First of all, the perspective of that song, I felt like is something I could relate to. I feel like I'll never know, but I feel like if I was going to have thoughts about it from being somebody around there, I understood that perspective that you were coming from. So I thought that was really great. My other thought during it was how lucky and fortunate I am to do this right now, right? To have you play that song and playing it on that guitar too. Man, I just felt really blessed and thankful for everybody that listens and supports, this podcast and allows me to do this. And I think that people who listen to, this episode specifically, are gonna, if they come into it, ready and willing to learn something and listen to a historic event from somebody else, from someone else's perspective, then you're going to get on the news, right? I think that people are going to learn a lot. And if somebody's never been in New York City like myself, I think it's kind of an eye-opening talk that we just had, man. So I can't thank you enough for doing this, for being open to do it and for having the talk. And you knew a lot about the Twin Towers. I'm extremely impressed. So I love it.
Yeah. I was and am fascinated with them on a sort of building nerd level. But I'm fortunate to have you invite me onto your show, and the fact that I get to play music for people and that any of them care to listen is just, like pinch me, it's crazy. Yeah. And I really like what you're doing. I think that you're kind of a sponge for new information and interest. And I think that, it's super cool. If you come to New York, you got to get in touch. I'll take you around. We'll go down to the Flounces Tavern down there where they had the party at the end of the Revolutionary War. And we'll get some chicken wings and some Guinness and we'll hang out.
I will literally, it's not going to be soon, but I will plan I'll plan a trip to New York just for that, man.
Yeah. You got to promise to get in touch. Cause I'll take you around.
Here's what I want to do. We're getting this podcast up and moving and got a lot of episodes we're going to crank out, but once things are really going along and you're off a tour, I want to make that happen, man, because like I told you, COVID changed my perspective. I was kind of the guy that's like, and I'm not even like, I've never even gone hunting, right? I'd love to, but I haven't, being in Nebraska. But I've been kind of more of like the Yellowstone, quiet, going to Colorado for the mountains type of a thing. But with COVID, it really changed my perspective of like, wow, there's so much out there. And even though it's man-made, it's still cool, And so I've been really open and wanting to do something like that. So I want that to happen, man. I want to go to New York, and I think you'd be the perfect guide for that. So we'll make it happen.
Absolutely. Get in touch, and we'll, what we'll do is, I don't know if you ride a bike.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll bike around the city, cause that's the way to do it.
Yeah, dude. We talked before about, I did some BMX in high school, right? So that'd be amazing. Take some BMX bikes out and go. Cause that's how I got to know my city. I felt like this, I think you probably relate. I've always felt like this really deep relationship with my city, kind of like what Anthony Kiedis sings about in with Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think Under the Bridge is the song, where it just feels like this connection to the city. And for me, that connection really came as a teenager, riding my BMX bike through every nook and cranny of the city, right? So that would be a blast, man.
That's it. That's the way to do it. You don't even have to bring one. I have a couple of cruisers, 24-inch cruisers. We'll pack a lunch and we'll head down there,
Hell yeah, man. Well, yeah. We'll make that happen, man. That's going to be a bucket list trip for me. So Brendan, thank you again for being on. You're about to hop back into the Summerland tour of 2021.
That's right. Yeah. Second leg. Get your tickets at summerlandtour.net. And we're headed out with Everclear and Living Color and Hoobastank. And we're very much looking forward to getting back together with our tour family again. So, cause we had such a great time the first run. And again, it's like a crazy blessing to be able to do this,
Again, seeing Living Color is crazy in and of itself. And then to think about them being with all of you guys, all of the bands that are going to be on there. I'm going to see you, we'll link up in Omaha and I can't wait for it. So
Nice. Okay. Well, make sure that we get in touch. I'll send you my number on email, and you can text me and just let me know that you're coming so we can get you on the guest list and whatever else. So.
Hell yeah, man. All right. Well, thanks again for being on, Brendan.
All right, brother.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really hope that this gives some people out there some new perspectives on September 11th. If you've never been to New York, or if you don't know the impact it had on the city, I hope that episodes like this are very helpful for you. Again, Brendan's going out on the Summerland Tour of 2021 with Everclear, Living Color, it's Wheatus, and Hoobastank as well. So I'm going to link up with them when they come into Omaha, and I can't wait for it. Please follow Wheatus on all social media, and please follow BookBrilliant on social media as well. Facebook.com/BookBrilliant. Instagram, we are at BookBrilliant. And on Twitter, what did I just say there? On Instagram, we're at BookBrilliant. Twitter, we are at BBookBrilliant. So please check that out. In the show notes, if you go to our website, bookbrilliant.com, you can find show notes for all of the episodes. You can find transcripts for the episodes. And you can find all of the books that have been referenced in the episodes. You can find that all on our website. Thank you, everyone, for checking it out.